Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Hey everybody, welcome in. Let's get it done. It's David Summers, and it's another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. It's the story of wrestling in America as told by the stud, whose family started the profession 100 years ago. So now we step back into the ring, back into time. Let's get wall-to-wall, treetop tall with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. Okay, Ron, some of us are a little slow, so maybe we won't get it back in time for Christmas. But if I order something from tnstud.com, I'll get it shortly after Christmas, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure at this point. Yeah. If you get the order in within the next 3 or 4 days, might still be able to get you some Christmas.
Okay, so you might could make it.
Yeah, might possibly could make it. So, they need to get them in pretty quickly if they want to take a shot at getting it before Christmas. But I would say it arrive before New Year's if you get it in.
So you have a friend in the shipping department?
I wish I did, man.
Hey, you've got some cool stuff though. You've got the photos, you've got the T-shirts, you've got the book, Brutus, of course, even autographed if we like. So we could work out a deal with Santa, even if it comes after Christmas. That's okay. tnstud.com. Remember that, tnstud.com. All right, Ron, I got to start this Studcast with your intriguing title for this one. You called it Fans Cry, Bob is Gone. So is this what happened in Southeastern Gulf Coast the week before Christmas in 1979?
Yeah, that's basically where we are, my man, and that's kind of exactly what happened, Dave. Bob Armstrong was there on the first night that Southeastern Wrestling made its debut, Dothan, Alabama, March the 3rd, 1978, and Bob had become maybe the most popular wrestler ever in that part of the country, or certainly he was getting there by that point. And by December of 1979, Bob had more loser-leave matches and wins than any other wrestler in Southeastern's 22-month history at that point. So he'd been basically unbeatable in those type of matches until the third week of December in 1979.
All right, I think you were returning to the Gulf Coast from Knoxville on that same week. Did you see any fans crying after his loss?
Yeah, in every city, man, in which he had loser-leave matches.
Yeah.
And I saw it, because I rode with him on a lot of those trips that week, I remember. And I saw, saw him not only cry, I saw him crying after the match, but they were waiting on him by the hundreds outside the dressing room to say goodbye to him before he left. It was like crazy,
Wow.
It was the first time, I guess, I really realized just how much fans loved him.
I was a Bob Armstrong fan. I maybe, and sadly, it's not until someone passes you realize, man, I was a fan of him. And I had the opportunity to meet Bob a couple of times. So if I remember correctly, a few Studcasts back, after you sold Knoxville and during a meeting with the 5 owners of Southeastern Gulf Coast territory, Bob said he needed to go home to Georgia to sell his house, move his family down to Pensacola with the rest of you guys, the owners. So from what I have heard, Bob stayed in the house he bought there for most of maybe the rest of his life.
That's correct. He sure did, Dave. And And he raised 4 fantastic wrestling sons during this time frame too. And Bob never left that area for 40 years until his passing in 2020.
Wow. So when he made the move, he definitely made the commitment. I have to bring this up, Stud. We just had a short conversation right before we started recording about a change coming up in the normal weekly Studcast schedule. So I think you have only missed one Studcast in more than 6 years. That is remarkable, a remarkable record. You were telling me why you would like to miss one next week, and the reason for that. Do you mind talking about that with the listeners, the reason?
No, not at all, Dave. I have a grandson, man, who lives in Kentucky. He's about 5 hours drive north of me. He's 16 years old. He's a sophomore in high school. He's 6 feet 9 inches tall, same height as I am.
Yeah.
He weighs over 230 pounds, and he plays basketball. So, I rarely get to see my son and his family, especially see my grandson play ball. So next week, he's going to be playing 3 nights in a row, and wouldn't you know it, it's right in the middle of the time that we regularly record these programs.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully Studcast listeners won't mind me missing one broadcast to be able to see him play 3 days in a row.
Well, Ron, you've only done 329. Are you sure you deserve something like that?
That's a good point, man.
Only 329. Come on. I don't think anybody's going to mind doing that, Stud. You told me you would not be releasing a Studcast next week, right?
Yeah, that's what it would be. I would not do one on the Wednesday, the regular Wednesdays where we normally send them out, and I have a great idea, though, to replace it, man. So we normally release these Studcasts every Wednesday, but we are so close to Christmas at this point that I would love to do something, Dave, we've never done for the first time ever. I'd love to release the next Studcast after this one, which is going to be number 330, on Christmas Day as a present to the fan. And also because, 44 years ago in 1979, on Christmas Day, we were wrestling in Pensacola, Florida, and we had a great card, and that included a special guest for Rob and I at the same time. So, I'd love to do this next one for them and release it on Christmas Day.
I think it's a great idea, Stud. A Christmas Day Studcast. So we're going to remind everybody along the way, again, before this Studcast ends. So right now, I want to ask about those mentions you made in the last episode about small changes coming to future Studcasts. All right, so I've heard a lot of good comments this week about plans for next year, spending more time teaching and explaining the wrestling business in greater detail. And you've done an amazing job of that along the way. So fans cannot find that kind of information. They can't get that kind of education anywhere else in wrestling podcast, period.
Well, I like to think that's the truth, Dave. I know that you don't get much of that with other podcasts. And many of the subjects I have in mind, I think, will be extremely interesting for every fan, and hopefully fans will let me know exactly how they feel about this idea. And I kind of rely heavily on my social media sites. I just have about 20,000 friends and subscribers, and I like for them to let me know what they think, and, so they can kind of let me know what they think about that concept. And so the first one of these subjects I want to begin with in January of 2024. It'll be in the first Studcast of that new year. And it's going to ride us back, man, into the 1940s. We're going to talk about how my grandfather started creating these boxing and wrestling commissions in states all across the South.
All right, so I can't wait to hear these stories. I remember you talking about a lot of this way back early on in Studcast history, but you also brought up something else very exciting in the last Studcast, the fact that as we move into 2024 and the Southeastern Company year of 1980, we're going to be able to access the first of many Southeastern TV shows. So we will hopefully be able to use the actual audios from interviews and personality profiles and some of those TV shows even from the past.
Yeah, it's going to make my descriptions of the TV wrestling shows infinitely better, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And pardon the pun, but many fans may be a little tired of hearing everything come straight from the horse's mouth.
All right, Stud, I'm not so sure that's the case when you do start hearing from fans. They love the detail with which you describe things. So some people even say you tell stories the way a good painter paints a picture. So speaking of describing things, tell us how it felt to be finally leaving Tennessee in this episode.
Well, Dave, kind of sad, to be honest with you, but the past year had been, in 1979, had been such a nightmare, especially the Knoxville War part of it. It really had started to affect my attitude toward life, to be honest. I really needed to get out of there, man, to get a change about almost everything in my life and kind of basically start all over again. I'd never pictured it ending this way, and up there in Knoxville, having a war and having to walk away from the territory and sell out. So I've fought to keep thinking that maybe someday in some way I might be going to make a return up there.
All right. It's been a long time since you had anything to say about your personal life. So I'm sure some listeners will be interested in hearing about that. Was there anything special, anyone special that was going to be going south with you?
Well, I think the last time, man, I probably mentioned anything about something like that was probably a couple of years ago, maybe. I had met this fiery man, young Greek girl from Gatlinburg, Tennessee, man, that had been with me since basically we opened the Southeastern Gulf Coast Territory in 1978. And she'd spent a lot of time in Pensacola down there with me in 1978. And she had experienced everything, man. And I'm talking about in those 2 years, including the Knoxville War, that really affected me. She had seen all that and been through all that. And I got one story that comes to mind on this subject since you brought that up. I mean, we'd packed up everything in the Knoxville 2-story townhouse that I'd been renting there for years. And to head to Pensacola, and this week that we're talking about. So the night before we left for Pensacola, we even slept on the floor because we packed the bed and everything else. So you know how that is. Sometimes you move and you end up not sleeping in the best environment, And then somehow we ended up in there's a 2-bedroom place, and we had an upstairs bathroom. We ended up in there, and we things had been so bad for so long, we just kind of broke down, man. And we're leaving there and all that, and because 1979 had been horrible, man, and the total year of stress, basically. So we cried for a while that night, and and we decided then to say a prayer for the future, man, basically. So I kind of thanked God for all He had given us, and I asked the good Lord to look over us and bless us with this move we were about to make. And when we left the next morning, I never looked back on anything that had happened there. And we were just days away from 1980 at that point, and about to be over the next 8 years, we're going to accomplish more down there on the Gulf Coast than I'd ever dreamed we could or would, man.
Wow. So it really sounds like He answered your prayers on that one. This has really been an excellent first part of this Studcast, but before we take our break, I would love to hear that entire card in Mobile, December 19th, 1979.
Okay, we can do that, Dave, before we go here. So the opening match was Jerry Stubbs. He was taking on the Mongolian number 2, let's call him. The number 1, obviously, was the Mongolian Stomper. This was his son. And that guy, his son, was managed by the great Mephisto. Joe Leduc was going back to wrestling just one man this time. He'd been in these handicap matches for quite a couple of weeks here now. But this guy that he was wrestling is just about as big as Joe. I mean, he weighed over 300 pounds, and he was called the Mass Executioner. So Joe's going to wrestle one guy this time, but the Executioner. Wrestling Pro was going at it again, man, against the guy that was out to get him, man, the Super Pro. And this time, that match was going to be a no disqualification match. The next match was the special challenge match. after what had happened to Tony Charles in the last Studcast, where the great Mephisto, after Tony won his belt back, the great Mephisto had come down to manage Norvell Austin. Mephisto jumps in the ring, attacks Tony, and puts him in his camel clutch hold. So Tony's going to get his shot at the great Mephisto. Be Mephisto's first time to wrestle, actually. And then the next match was asked for by my brother Rob. And after both him and Jimmy Golden and Rob's match the week before, his partner was Jerry Stubbs. They were wrestling against the Mongolians for the Southeastern Tag Championship. And along came Jimmy Golden and Norvell Austin, just like they had a month earlier. And they attacked Rob again. Then Rob had talked to Don Curtis that ran the company about having a mystery partner, having a tag match, and he told the mystery partner he didn't want to find out who he was going to have as his partner until the match time came. So then the main event was for the Southeastern Championship, held by Bob Armstrong, had been for quite a while. And he was facing the Mongolian Stomper, managed by the great Mephisto. This time, the belt was at stake. It was a no disqualification match. There had to be a winner. And the worst part of it, or maybe the best part, is there was a loser leave for the guy that lost.
Wow, that was, as you said earlier, Stud, a tremendous card. When we come back after the break, we're going to find out what other than the bus pull by Joe Leduc, what was next on the TV? The bus pull is coming up. That's pretty cool. We got to hear about that on the way when this Studcast continues. All right, Studcast fans, get ready. This Saturday, December 16th, 2023, it's the release of Ask the Stud 12 Question and Answer Show, exclusively on YouTube Southeastern Rewind. It's another old school classic full of great answers from the old school expert, the Tennessee Stud. Don't forget, the next Studcast will be on Christmas Day 2023, a special broadcast for fans around the world. That's Ask the Stud 12, this Saturday, December 16th, 2023, and Studcast number 330 on Christmas Day, 2023. All right, Studcast fans, welcome back in to another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. This is episode number 329, Fans Cry, Bob is Gone. All right, Ron, we're ready to get into the TV show for that great card, Wednesday, December 19th, 1979. Were you on the card or at the TV for this one? Either one.
Well, I'd rather not say at this point, Dave. Let's just hang without mentioning that for a little bit here.
All right.
I will say I had arrived in the territory a couple of days before this TV show. I'd gotten back down there, and it opened up the show with the great Mephisto and Charlie Platt at the set. Mephisto had his tag team champions with their belts on, standing behind him at the set when the show opened. And Charlie, haven't seen the video for the coming week. There was several videos that were going to be shown in this show. He started out on the great Mephisto right away. He asked him right off, he says, why is it that you were involved in 3 different matches in one night, and you put your signature camel clutch hold on 3 different wrestlers when you weren't even scheduled to wrestle or be involved in those matches? So Mephisto, he didn't answer. He had no answer, actually. And he quickly told Charlie, he said, let's run the video from the Infidels Armstrong's match with my Mongolian Stomper. And he said, and then I'll kind of start to explain this to you. And then so, he said there was reasons I got involved. So the video started toward the end of the last fall of the Texas Death Match for the Southeastern Championship match. And when Bob, that's what the match was, and obviously it didn't have many Texas Death Matches when it came down to championships. So this was a very unusual match the week before, the one they're watching on video. So when Bob got the sleeper hold on the Stomper, Mephisto screamed to stop the video. And, and when it stopped, and Mephisto asked Charlie, he said, can you not see they were holding, there was a video stopped, so it showed Bob, he's got the sleeper hold on the Stomper. He said, can you not see that American sleeper hold that he's got there? He says, that's clearly a chokehold. And he said, and this was the second time in this match, this death match, that he had put that on my man, my Mongol. And he said he had choked my Mongol out, but he says the American referee wouldn't stop the infidel from doing it. He said he had to be seeing it was a chokehold, and he says, I'm sure it was his decision, to allow Armstrong to win, to keep his belt. So he said, and then when the video, he said, okay, you could start the video. And when the video continued, Mephisto pointed out his Mongol, and he said, now look, my Mongol's up on his feet. It's a death match, but he's risen to his feet. And he goes, but the stupid American referee says he stops the match and he gives the belt back to Bob Armstrong, knowing that Bob Armstrong hadn't won. And then he took off into the wrestling company itself, Southeastern. He said, this wrestling company here, they're obviously prejudiced against my Mongols. And he says, I'd had enough at this point, Charlie Platt, in the match. And he said, I had to do something about it. And he said, I couldn't stop myself, And he said, I entered the ring, and he said, I was already there, and I found myself. I had my camel clutch on this American infidel to prove to everyone, that he, me and my Mongol, we're his superiors. That's for darn sure. So then Charlie asked the director to stop the tape at that point. And when it stopped, Charlie pointed out to Mephisto. He says, first of all, he goes, you got no right to be in the ring at all, And he says, on top of that, he says, look at your hold. It's called the camel clutch. And he says, when you normally put that hold on people, I have seen pictures of that hold. He says, you have your hands underneath the opponent's chin, you sitting in his back, and you rear back holding his head underneath his chin. He goes, but look at where your hands are there. They're across his throat. You're choking him. You're holding him back and choking him at the same time. So Mephisto, he goes, he says, that's not my fault. He says that Mongol, that infidel here, Bob Armstrong, he says, he's got a long chin, an extremely long face and chin. And he said, then he changed his subject entirely, saying, my Mongol, and the next week he says, he's going to do three things that's never been done before here. He says he's going to take the infidel Bob Armstrong's belt. He's going to become the first person to ever hold all three Southeastern titles. And most importantly, he's going to run Bob Armstrong out of Southeastern wrestling forever. So then he got up from his seat and told Charlie, he said something, about, I'm tired of being insulted. I'm not going to be insulted any further by you. And he took his champion tag team back to the dressing room.
Well, that's just what you do. Okay, so a long chin, huh? I never noticed Bob Armstrong having a long chin. All right, who was in the first TV match?
Well, Bob Armstrong, the guy with the long chin.
There you go.
Right, so, and the studio audience, they were pleased to see Bob, man. And, Bob usually was on the last match, but this time he's on the opening match in this show. And they were especially happy to see that he was still wearing his Southeastern Championship belt. And he made those studio crowd even happier, man. He put a guy out with his sleeper hold, the one that Mephisto called the chokehold. So that's how he won the match.
All right, so who was next?
Well, it was your man, Dave, the wrestling pro.
Yes.
And he joined Charlie at the set, and he watched his first match, the first official match between the wrestling pro and the super pro. And the wrestling pro was very honest about the match. He gave a lot of credit to the super pro. He basically said, this guy's a lot tougher than what I thought he was, and he says, especially, since, he had challenged me when he got here, but he's been running for me ever since, and he says, finally, I find out that he's not the weak guy I expected him to be. So at the end of the video, he told everyone that he could see this was just basically the beginning of these matches between him and the Super Pro. And that the next one was a no disqualification match. But he said he already knew. He said, I'm preparing that's not going to be the last one. I mean, this is going to take me some time. This guy's tough, and he said that he had spent, much of his career in this part of the country, and he'd made a very good reputation for himself here. And he goes, and then he said, he thought this Super Pro was probably a younger guy and trying to get a win over him to, simply to make a name for himself, basically, right? So he described the situation between the two of them as kind of like he was kind of explaining what this is going to be like. He said, it's kind of like a gunfight in the Old West. He goes, there's an outlaw here, and he's on his way up, man. He's trying to knock off the sheriff. And he says, that's been the man for years. That's basically the real pro in these matches, And he says, but I'm looking forward to the fight. I know this is going to be a struggle, but I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so that was pretty unusual that he put the Super Pro over so strong and used an example of a sheriff and an outlaw. Obviously, since Leon had been wrestling under that white mask and he was in law enforcement, the Houston County Sheriff's Department, for most of his life, actually. So what about the second match? Who was in that one?
Well, the young guy that Leon had just described, man, is the young outlaw. So someone that will, this guy, man, the Super Pro, is going to, over the next couple of years, he's going to work his way up in this company in Southeastern from being a guy called the Super Pro to he's going to become a part of the Southeastern tag team that's going to become one of the most famous in wrestling history, the Midnight Express. So Bob and Rob had been raving to me about this young wrestler, man, how good he was. And so this is my first opportunity to see him, and I could easily see why they were so excited about him. But I didn't really get excited until I saw the end of the match, and he shot this guy in and clotheslined him. I thought he took the guy's head off. I was like, son of a gun. Wow, this guy is bad.
Wow. I notice you have not given us the name of this young wrestler, only some hints. So what is the reason for that, if I can ask? And it was also time for the personality profile, I think.
Yeah, so, the reason I haven't given his name is because I wanted to see how many people remember who he was. When he arrived and, first time he was ever seen in Southeastern Gulf Coast, he was wrestling as a Super Pro. And we're about to head into 1980, and pretty soon fans are going to find out what his real wrestling name is. But, fans respond to me sometimes, and I like to keep people guessing, and I like to see if they really know who this Super Pro was. What was his real name? So I welcome the contacts and your guesses out there to see how many people really know this guy. So, and you're right, Dave. It's time for the personality profile. And when I came up into the station that day, I saw in the big yard out there a school bus. Right, and then we talked about it a little bit last week. The big old yard out there was all flat and nice, grassy, and everything. So before the TV show started, just as had happened 2 weeks earlier, before the show that had the tug of war in it with Joe Leduc, Charlie Platt and Joe Leduc, and two handheld cameramen, and just about everyone that was sitting in the studio before the show started went outside again to see Joe pull the 7,000-pound bus with just his neck and his legs, man.
All right, so I've been looking forward to this all week. Sorry, I never got to. I hate I didn't get to see that in person, but I can't wait to hear about it. So tell us how it went down.
Well, Rob described it for me, because I would see the edited version later in the actual personality profile. But all the baby faces in the dressing room went outside to see it live, as they had for the tug of war. And I heard on the far side of the building that all the Hills watched out there as well. They went out the far side of the building and watched out, standing out there in the grass as well. So there was this red line that had been painted on the grass in front of the bus, and another red line painted on the grass 20 feet further away from the front of the bus. And so the studio fans were kind of standing everywhere around the bus. And the camera started rolling. Charlie started explaining to everybody what they were about to see. So Charlie had a cameraman go on the bus with him to show that it was a standard city type of bus that picked up citizens every day, and then Charlie put the headgear on Joe that Joe had shown last week in his personality profile that gave people an idea of what he wanted to do with the bus. So he put the headgear on Joe, and he connected the ropes onto the big loops on both sides of the headgear, and then connected the ropes to the front of the bus. And then so Joe positioned himself in front of the bus, and then as far out as the ropes would allow. And he was still going to have to pull the bus to 20 feet, obviously. So Charlie asked if Joe was ready, and he said yes, and Charlie yelled, go. And so Joe leaned, man, his body forward until it looked as though he might fall on his face, man, and he's straining, obviously.
Wow.
Until his face and his head was blood red. The bus did not move an inch for about 10 seconds. It looked like he wasn't going to be able to budge it, right? And then finally it started to inch forward, and when it did, the studio crowd out there watching, they began to buzz a little bit like, wow, maybe he can do this. And then Joe kind of, as the further he went, the more he leaned forward. And when he did, he kind of got that thing moving. And he had that huge load behind him, and the wheels slowly began to turn. And then the crowd responded with, they started chanting, go, Joe, go, go, Joe, go. They were into it, man. So when he was about at the halfway point, the fans could tell he was maybe going to get it done. And they began to cheer at that point, and the bus kept slowly moving forward. And when the bus's front crossed the finish line, Joe was mobbed by the fans, man. They just went crazy. They just covered him up, and you could tell he was exhausted. And they had a shot. Charlie tried to talk to him just a second, and he was already sweating, obviously, and you could tell just how much those fans, though, had helped him. Well, by being out there and giving him that push to make this happen.
Wow. So how could something like that and the 20-man tug of war 2 weeks earlier not make a huge star out of anyone?
Yeah, isn't that the truth?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That was the idea behind everything we did with Joe, and he did all the rest. He was genuinely one of the nicest people on the face of the earth, especially when he was around the fans.
Yeah.
And the best part about all that, Dave, is it was his true personality. None of that was phony. None of that was faked. He loved people. And when they got to know him, people loved Joe Leduc. It was amazing.
Yep.
So to give you a better idea of what I'm saying, this is what happened after the bus pull, and the fans went back into the studio and they got in their seats, ready for the upcoming TV show. Before the show started, Joe went out into the studio and he thanked all those fans for coming out and watching the bus pull and for help cheering him. And then he went around the bleachers and he shook hands with just about everybody in the building, right? Mm-hmm. And talking to people. Joe just had a tremendous personality. And so the personality profile, when it was shown back in the middle of the show with Charlie and Joe, they were sitting right there within a few feet of those fans that had witnessed this feat of strength minutes earlier, a little earlier outside. And they had already had Joe come out and thank him and all that. And so during that profile, it was one of the best we had ever seen because the fans were so into it. They just kept clapping and cheering for it, even when they watched him actually pulling the bus for a second time. So Rob said it sent chills down his spine. He watching it back in the back. And what was going on between Joe and the fans was really phenomenal. I'd not been in the Southeastern Territory for months at this point. I'd actually been in Knoxville since October of 1979, and I'd seen obviously the wrestling numbers, the weekly numbers at the matches, and I knew the Gulf Coast Territory was doing a lot better than Tennessee, but I had no idea what was really happening down there until I got there, and I would soon see all of it for myself. So I knew the plans for Joe. I'd talked to Rob, and we discussed it a whole lot, and we could, we knew that if we could just get Joe over as a babyface, that potentially what was going to happen at the box office was going to be phenomenal. We'd experienced it in Knoxville when Joe wrestled Stomper. So, but I had no idea until this day how close we were getting, man, to this goal of getting Joe Leduc over.
Wow, if I'm correct, that was the third personality profile in a row with Joe Leduc, and this one sounds like it may have been the best yet, for real. So, who was Joe? Just had that. Joe had that way when even if you were a young person watching on TV, you thought, I like that guy, and I want to know that he had that sort of personality. So it's just magnetic. All right, who was up next?
Well, Tony Charles. And he had won his United States Junior Heavyweight Championship belt back the week before against Norvell Austin. And Jimmy Golden had been barred from the building. And so Charlie welcomed Tony to the set, and they were going to watch two things: how Tony regained the title and what happened immediately afterward. So Tony started with the fact that Golden didn't get involved in the match. But then he asked Charlie, they're watching the video, he goes, but I didn't understand why the great Mephisto came down with Norvell Austin. Instead of Jimmy Golden, he noticed that Golden was barred from the building. He couldn't come down. But what was Mephisto doing there, basically, right? So then the video showed the end of the match, and it showed the spectacular throw that Tony Charles beat Austin with. Wow, it was another one of those I'd never seen. And then it showed Mephisto. As soon as Tony got handed the belt and he was the champion again, Mephisto jumped in the ring, attacked him from behind, and then Mephisto put the camel clutch on Tony after the match was over. And to make it even worse, Mephisto, just as he had done to Bob Armstrong in the video earlier in the show, wrapped his hands around Tony's throat instead of his chin, and obviously there was a real chokehold. He was complaining about Armstrong's sleeper being a chokehold. His version of it was a real chokehold. So Tony asked him to stop the video, and then he told Charlie that he had asked Don Curtis for a match against Mephisto. And he goes, basically because Mephisto attacked me, and he had no reason to do that. And he said, I also heard that a fact that I had never known, that Mephisto was a former world junior heavyweight champion. And he goes, I want to face the best, Charlie. And Tony was like that. He wanted to wrestle the best wrestlers he could. Mm-hmm. So he says, for the first time since Mephisto and the Mongolians had been here, Mephisto's going to get in the ring, and he's going to wrestle me next week.
Wow. So I'm sure fans were wondering how good he was after hearing that he was a former world junior champion. So who was in the next TV match?
Well, Rob had this TV set up pretty good. The guy that everybody was asking that question about, the great Mephisto. He wrestled on TV. So fans were going to find out right then. They were going to have to wait to the match during the week, and so they were in for a huge surprise. The great Mephisto's real name was Frankie Kane, and Frankie Kane was the guy behind the exotic robes and the headgear, but Frankie Kane was more than just a manager. He was one of the best wrestlers in the world, and no doubt, and he displayed it in this TV match. He dominated his opponent. It was unbelievable. And then he finished by putting the camel clutch on him. Except this time he didn't wrap his hands around the guy's throat. He put them on his chin so that he wouldn't get disqualified. And he got his hand raised in his TV match.
Okay, yeah, there's a little bit of difference between the the throat, and the chin. All right, so last segment of the TV show. Set that up for us. Who was in that?
Well, the end of the TV show started with Robert at the set with Charlie. And he still had a bandage, on his forehead from this tag championship match in Mobile, which was 4 days earlier at this point. And they watched a video of what had happened in the match between Rob and Jerry Stubbs against the Mongolians for the Southeastern Tag Championship. And when it began, Rob and Jerry were well on their way to winning the tag belts. And when the video showed, it showed them swapping off potential pins. They were just covering the second Mongolian, the son of the Mongolian Stomper. They were just about to beat him. One would cover him and he'd kick out. They would tag out. The other would cover him. It went on for almost 2 minutes. It was amazing how many times the guy kicked out. So from out of nowhere, all of a sudden, in the video, here comes Jimmy Golden and Norvell Austin. And they go straight to Rob, almost exactly like what they had done 6 weeks earlier when Rob and Jerry Stubbs were wrestling the Mongolians for the first time, when Rob and Jerry were the champions and they lost their belts that time to the Mongolians because of Jimmy Golden and Norvell Austin. So the only thing different this time was how much more vicious their attack was. And the bell was being rung as the Mongolians were being disqualified for the outside interference, but that didn't stop the two Mongolians and the great Mephisto. You got Jimmy Golden and Norvell Austin on Rob, and the three of them just focused on Jerry Stubbs. And then finally, the Mephisto puts his camel clutch on the third guy that he's done it, and then one night he puts his camel clutch on Stubbs. So meanwhile, Golden and Austin, they had opened up on Rob, man, and they had brought some object to the ring with him, and they'd busted him open pretty good, man. And then they took turns pile driving him while the other one jumped off the ropes and grabbed his legs and jammed his head into the mat. I mean, so Rob asked Charlie, to please stop the tape. Gosh, he'd seen enough, basically. And he told Charlie that Stubbs, his former partner, was very upset, and he wanted to get even with the Mongolians, and he had asked for a face-to-face match. He'd asked Don Curtis about a face-to-face match with one of the Mongols. He didn't care which one it was next week, and Curtis had told him he would do it. So then he said, well, Charlie, so he said, since, he got his match, he said, I asked Curtis about a special match that I wanted. And he says, he said, at this point, he goes, I'm expecting that there's no way I'm going to wrestle either Golden or Austin and not have the other one get involved. So he goes, I asked Curtis, instead of having a single match, he goes, I'd like to have a tag match. And he goes, I want it to be against Golden and Austin. But he says, I want to have a mystery partner. And he goes, it's going to be somebody other than Jerry Stubbs. But, he said, because Jerry's got us match next week, but he says, I want a mystery partner, and I don't want him seen until we get to the match time. So Charlie wished him luck on his upcoming tag match with his mystery partner, and told everyone that the next match on the TV was going to be with Rob. So Rob had the last match in the show, and he went straight to the ring. And as he was being announced, Jimmy Golden and Norvell came to the set. And Charlie said, "Y'all aren't been invited here, and I don't really want you here." So they didn't care. They ignored me. They weren't listening to Charlie, so they ignored his request. And they told him, they weren't aware. They said, "We don't know nothing about this scheduled tag match with Robert and his so-called mystery partner." He goes, but they said it didn't matter either way. He says, they said Rob's right. We are going to gang up on him every chance we get, right? So at this point, Rob's taking care of business in the ring, and he's making pretty short work, man, out of his opponent. So Charlie asked Golden and Austin again. He says, "All right, guys, you've had your little say. Well, how about leaving the set?" So Golden then says to Norvell, he goes, and he says to Charlie, he says, "I think that's a good idea, Charlie Platt." And then he says to Norvell, he says, "Don't you think it's about time we maybe take right now that we kind of gang up on the Fuller?" Right? No, Bill said, okay, yeah, let's do that. Right? So they just went straight to the ring, right? And Charlie's screaming him for, no, come back here, don't worry. So, but it's too late. So they both hit the ring and they started on Rob, man. And Rob was really fighting back until they got him bleeding again, right? Then they grabbed the referee. They threw the referee over the top rope. They got rid of him, basically. And then Jerry Stubbs came to the ring trying to help Rob. But the Mongolian that he's going to be wrestling the next week, he came out and just he grabbed Stubbs, pulled him off to the side, and they started fighting out on the floor. So studio crowd was going crazy, man. And they started, so Golden and Austin went back to Rob. They just kept doing what they were doing, and the wrestling pro then came to the ring. And he slid into the ring. Before he could even get up and go to help, the Super Pro pulled him out onto the floor, and they started fighting. So Bob Armstrong came. And, Mongolian Stomper did the same thing. He went and grabbed Bob, and, boy, it was pandemonium in the building, man. Wrestlers are fighting everywhere. And so I was the mystery man as Rob's partner in the upcoming tag match. I didn't want to be seen at this point. But all this is going on, and Golden and Austin are beating the heck out of Rob. So, there wasn't a fan in the Gulf Coast that had seen me in months. And I hated to show myself, man. Let the cat out of the bag, basically. But heck, I had no choice at that point. So as soon as I left the studio and left the dressing room and they saw me in the studio, boy, I got a big pop. The roof came off that place. And I started on Golden and Austin. They ran for the dressing room, and it took a couple of minutes for things to settle down around the ring in the studio. And then after they got the studio cleared and they got the wrestlers back in the dressing room, then I made the last interview about the upcoming tag match that I was going to be. There's no mystery about the partner, and me and Rob are going to take care of business.
Wow, that's really a fantastic TV show, no doubt. It had almost everything you could think of, especially the ending. Too bad you couldn't have made it to the arenas before revealing yourself. So what happened in Mobile the following Wednesday night?
Well, Jerry Stubbs won his match with the Mongolian, Joe Leduc. He not only beat the 300-pound executioner, he took his mask off too. So Joe's kicking butt. I mean, he's really, really making a name for himself at this point. The Wrestling Pro and the Super Pro went at it again. Just as bad and as violent a match as the week before. It was a no DQ match this time, and it was finally stopped. But only when the Super Pro left the ring and he went back to the dressing room. So, there was no clear-cut winner to that one for sure. The Tony Charles challenge match with the great Mephisto ended up in a disqualification of Mephisto. But Tony wasn't finished with Mephisto. There's going to be some more of that. And in the tag match between Rob and I against Golden and Austin, the referee got hurt toward the end of the match. He was out on the floor. We were all four fighting everywhere, all over the building. And then the Mongolian Stomper comes down, and he jumps me. I don't know why that happened, but obviously Bob was watching the match, so he came down and he got in it with Stomper, and they fought up into the ring, and Golden and Austin headed for the dressing room, and me and Rob chased them there, man. And we couldn't catch them because they weren't taking any chances. It was Mobile. So the great Mephisto, at this point, came down the ringside. The Stomper and Bob were already there fighting. And, he nailed Bob from behind. He threw him out of the ring. Stomper went out of the ring, grabbed Bob, and ran him into the steel ring post. Match hadn't even started, hadn't even been introduced, and Bob's already got a big cut. And about that time, the second referee assigned to the last match, he finally got down to the ring, and no one was sitting down in the building. I can tell you, man, they were really, really up, and they never did sit down. Bob came in, he was bleeding. They introduced him. They introduced the match. They started into the match, and so at the end of the match, Bob got the sleeper hold on the Mongol. And he grabbed, the Mongol reached out, the referee standing in front of him. He's checking his hand. Mongol reached out, grabbed the referee, jerked him in face first into Bob. And all of them went down. Mongol went down too. So did Bob and the referee. And here comes Mephisto, man. And he puts the camel clutch on Bob again, choking him again. And then when he sees the referee moving around, he turned Bob over, dropped him, turned him over on his back, and he put the Stomper on top of him and left the ring. Referee rolled over there, and he counted Bob out. And it took every one of the policemen in the building, man, to get the Stomper and Mephisto back to the dressing room.
Wow.
And I already explained kind of what I saw after the match, at the first of the show here, about the affection from the fans, and I'll never forget, man, how the Mobile crowd in particular dealt with Bob's loss that night.
Wow. Okay. How about the attendances in those three major cities during that third week in December 1979?
Well, it's pretty amazing, Dave. Almost unheard of, actually, man. And we were 1 week before Christmas, and every one of those three cities, crowds got bigger. So Montgomery went from 2,300 up to 2,600. Dothan went from 3,300 to 35. And Mobile went from 39 back over 4,000 to 4,400. So all three of the cities combined had an increase of more than 1,000 fans 1 week before Christmas. Christmas was 6 days away, as a matter of fact, from the Mobile show.
Okay, so from what you have said about the difficulty of drawing crowds that time of year, that had to be a good sign of what was to come. Guess what, Stud? You're never going to believe it. We have time. I'm going to force it in. It's a learning tree question. So let's get to it. Want to do it? You want to do it?
Cool, man. Let's do it.
All right, here we go. This one comes from Tom Doss in Pall Mall, Tennessee. He asks, in the YouTube match you and Barry Windham had against Bruiser Brody and Stan Hansen in Japan, it seemed like they were pretty stiff competition.
Boy. Mr. Doss, I bet you got the idea for this question from one of my recent, I've been doing these when wrestling was wrestling posts on my social media sites. And this last one I did had a photo of the giant Baba. Had his foot, he was standing up and he had his foot stuck in the face of Harley Race. Man, it was a great shot. So I guess, Mr. Dawson, obviously a lot of people have seen that on YouTube with me and Barry Windham against Brody and Hansen. So, let's talk a little bit about wrestling in Japan as a whole. I mean, wrestling in Japan, that has the stiffest competition in the world, man. And by stiffest, I mean, wow, everybody just kills each other. So, and I've been in a lot of places in the world to wrestle, so I have a pretty good idea of where wrestling is at its stiffest. And I think it's probably in that country of Japan. And everybody, especially the Japanese wrestlers, were very stiff, and I didn't mind it. A lot of guys go over there and they complain. And I used to talk to Rob, said, "You ever going to Japan?" He goes, "No, man, I'm not going there. Why would I going to wrestle over there?" Right? Because, it's a tough place to go. So, but I never minded it because a lot of guys always said I was stiff. So I was like, well, heck, it's okay. I can handle it. That's kind of the way I wrestled most of the time anyway. So, but there was no pair of wrestlers in Japan, I can tell you this, that even compared to being stiffer than Brody and Hansen. Those guys were unbelievable.
Wow.
And they even had a way of, they started their thing before they ever got to the ring. When the bell rang for them to come out, Brody come out with a lasso, a rope, and a chain, and Brody come out with a chain, and Hansen would come out with his rodeo rope.
Yeah.
They would be, swinging those chains and the rope, and and the Japanese would be rushing them, and they would just be taking the feet out from under them, and they leave a path of bodies laying between the ring and the dressing room before they even got to the ring. And when they got to the ring, they never went down the aisle where they were supposed to. They would go to the back of a ringside section, and they would go through that section. So the chairs all over. It was like, gosh almighty, it was pandemonium. So, it was nobody compared to them, man. And that YouTube match that you're talking about here, Mr. Doss, with Barry and I, that happened to be the first night we wrestled in Japan. And we worked with Brody and Hansen. That match that you saw, the match was in Osaka, Japan. We had traveled there on the bullet train the very first day we got there. And that night we wrestled Hansen and Brody on TV. And the fact that it's TV, it means that they're going to be stiffer than they usually are, right? I mean, it's going to, it's going to be horrible. It's a horrible experience, right? So, almost all wrestlers work a little stiffer on TV. And these guys were already stiff, so it was unbelievable. So, Tom, I guess my answer to you is yes, it was a very stiff match. Let's just put it that way. And as soon as Brody and Hansen, that match was over, when me and Barry finished the match, we went right straight through the dressing room and out the back door and caught a cab back to the hotel, right? And, and for those listeners out there that may not know who Barry Windham's father was, Barry Windham's father was Blackjack Mulligan. 330 pounds and 6'8". I mean, Blackjack was a bad dude himself, right? So when me and Barry get in the cab and we're both still huffing and puffing from the match and trying to catch our breath, and finally I look over at Barry and I say, well, what did you think of that match? And it was one of the best answers I ever heard, I believe, from a wrestler. I'll never forget it. And he's huffing and puffing, and he goes, Ron, he says, my daddy never beat me like that.
Wow. You two, Barry Windham and you, it had to be like the Twin Towers. How tall was Barry?
Barry's about 6'5", 6'6".
I thought so. Yeah, I thought he was a pretty big guy. Also, you two had to look like the Twin Towers together.
He was a great partner. I really enjoyed wrestling with Barry. We were there for 18 days, man. And it was an 18-day tour, and we had, guess how many nights we had off in 18 days?
I would say 0.
We got one night off.
Wow. Okay, you lucked out. But that's
so after weeks in Japan, just like all other wrestlers, when you go to Japan, after you spent weeks in Japan, you come home and take off for a month to get well.
Wow. Plus that line, my daddy never beat me like that. That's absolutely awesome. That had to be one of those awakening moments once you two got in the vehicle together. Listen, I love these Studcasts. What a tough way to make a living, traveling halfway around the world to just get stomped on. So we never know what you're going to say, Ron, or give us to think about. This one, like all the rest, has been so full of information in wrestling history. I can't wait for the next one. In fact, where are we going to be riding in the next one? The Studcast, the next one is going to be number 330. Where do we go there?
Well, remember, next week there's going to be no Studcast. We talked about this earlier, and I'm going to go see my son, hopefully play basketball in Kentucky. Then the next Studcast, which is going to be number 330, it's not going to be released on the normal Wednesday. It will be released about 5 days after that on Monday, December the 25th, on Christmas Day. And it happens to be exactly the same day, 44 years later, that in Pensacola, we're going to be talking about this next card. And that next card is going to be really something special, man, on a very special day. It had 2 championship matches on it. this card in Pensacola on Christmas Day, and it had a Texas death match between the wrestling pro and the super pro. It had a 6-man tag with the Mongolian Stomper joining forces with Golden and Austin, and they're going to face me and Rob and my dad, Buddy. And
Wow.
my father hadn't been there. Basically, he was a huge star in that part of the country in the 50s and the 60s. So, and he was still a pretty darn good wrestler at this point. Even though he was in his 50s, he could still go. And so we're going to have a heck of a card. And the next one we'll be talking about, that's going to be on Christmas Day coming up here. And then I will also be, it'll also be the last Studcast we're going to have about 1979. Thank goodness in a way, Dave. I hate to say it, but we're about to finish 79, man.
Wow.
And I'm going to take a little time, as I always do on the last Studcast, about a year to kind of wrap up the year, man, and kind of looking forward to it and kind of not because of the year it was, right? But then we're going to talk a little bit about, man, where we're headed, man. We're going into a new era, a new decade. Southeastern is going to be, the sky's the limit. That's basically what it's going to be for Southeastern. In 1980, the sky is going to be the limit.
Wow, that's awesome. All right, folks, you know the deal. Find Ron on Facebook at Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud. Like and follow him there. Automatically become friends with a living legend. On Twitter, or now known as X, Twitter, find him at Ron Fuller Welch. Same thing there, and follow him there too. Check out the fantastic website at tnstud.com, tnstud.com. As the Stud said, you might get it back in time for Christmas if you get your orders in now, and if you don't mind, it might come a day or two after Christmas. This Studcast is going to be there, tnstud.com, with every Studcast ever done. Shop the Stud store. You can get 43 Super Studcasts, 4 different 8x10 photos of the Stud, the thrilling Lion novel Brutus, even personally autographed to you if you so choose, and T-shirts on special for Christmas, $15.99. That's a great deal on those Stud T-shirts. Subscribe now at YouTube, Southeastern Rewind. Get the best in old school wrestling. On YouTube, it's so simple. In the search bar, put in Southeastern Rewind. It's the first one that comes up. You'll find 372 videos, the last 106 Studcast, including this one, 52 Stud stories, 88 short rides with the Stud, now 11 great Ask the Stud question and answer shows. And on Saturday, December 16th, 2023, Ask the Stud number 12 will be there, all exclusively on YouTube, Southeastern Rewind, the best deal in old school wrestling. Any final comments today, Stud?
Yeah, not going to be back on till Christmas, and I want to wish everybody out there a very Merry Christmas, and thanks to all of you that supported me over the years. Take care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.